Księżyc od nowiu do nowiu. Nowa książka Martina Caparrosa, autora słynnego Głodu. I kolejna książka, po której bardzo ciężko się śpi. Bo to wojny, bo to choroby, bo to handel ludźmi, bo to ludzie zmuszeni do ucieczki ze swoich miejsc, którzy próbują sobie poukładać życie gdzieś indziej. I to są bardzo niewesołe historie. Martin Caparrós w studiu Radia Z. Welcome to the Map of the World. That's the name of the show. Your books are like a voice of our collective, this Western world's conscience. Reading them is like receiving postcards from places we actually don't want to visit, or maybe we even try really hard to forget they even exist. Mm-hmm. And you keep sending them and keep sending them. Mm-hmm. At the same time, you don't assign blame in your books. And frankly, I don't buy that. Why? Who's to blame for the stories you tell? And who's to blame for the places you describe?
I don't know. I think because, as you said, it's not... I wasn't trying to do a definite process of the situation of migration in the world. This is a book, it's an involuntary book. To begin with. I mean, really, literally, I wasn't writing it. I just found out at some point of this travel that took, as I told you, 28 days, that I had kind of a book and I could keep on with it and I couldn't finish it. And it was that much involuntary that I didn't publish it at the beginning. At the beginning, I printed it. I just printed 100 and some copies, and I offered them to my friends when I turned 50 for my 50th anniversary. So it wasn't really intended to be a book. It's involuntary, which means that for one, it's much more intimate than other books of mine. I mean, that's mostly notes I took for me, and that became a book. I don't know exactly why. And then it doesn't have an intention of, let's say, totality, as Hunger did. Mm. It's, just a narration of 28 days of a very stupid and crazy trip, you know. So maybe there's no blame. I'm still not so sure that there is not.
But still you pay a lot of attention to use of words, to phrasing.
Well, that's what that's what we do for a living.
Yeah, that's true, but not only writers or reporters have to deal with that. We, in the West, we learned to speak about poverty, especially in very certain code, in certain phrases. We don't say third world anymore. We say developing countries, like it changed something. Mm-hmm. So for whose benefit we use this code, which seems very respectful and very important to use, for whose benefit we use that coding, if the places that people live in don't change, they are the same. It's just the way we describe them changes.
Yeah, well, I think it's for the benefit of ourselves as people who don't want to think about things. I mean, it's easier not to think when you use this, what I call bureaucraties, right? This language which tries mostly not to say what it's saying. Right? I mean, usually languages are built up in order to try to say things, but bureaucraties, it's mostly useful not to say anything or to hide what they are saying. And the benefit is for all of us, because as you said before, most of us don't want to know about this kind of things. So using this language is one of the ways we use in order not to know.
You told in this book, you said something, I don't like political correctness. Mm-hmm. Why?
Well, because it's exactly
the
way of not saying what we are supposed to, what we should say. Yeah.
You lived in New York, haven't you?
For a year, yeah.
Is it different in the States than in Uganda or in Zimbabwe or in Zambia where you visited? Because Americans, they value political correctness, especially the language they use very much in various places and on various occasions. Yeah. They try not to offend different people out of respect, not to cover something up. just not to offend someone's feelings.
Yeah.
And maybe we just should stick to that political correctness language in first world countries, while lose that completely when we talk about developing countries or poorer countries.
No, but developing countries, for instance, it's a way of using political correctness,
That's
right?
true. That's true.
So they use it all the time because they are afraid of anything, of everything. I mean, they are afraid of words, but they are afraid of gestures, and they're afraid of any contact between people. I mean, they have such a code of distances, verbal, actual, physical, etc., because they're so much afraid. I mean, I'd say... I didn't think about it before, but I'd say that political correctness is like the veils that Muslim women have to use. You know, the fact that their men are so much afraid of what a woman can produce in them that they cover them, and political correctness is a way of covering the real meaning of things, because men and women in this case are so much afraid of them that they have to hide them.
Immigration wave like 2 or 3 years ago here in Europe, when you looked at things through media coverage, it looked like Europe was a fortress being stormed by like horde of barbarians trying to get across the sea to steal what we have, to rape our women. You know, it was like frightening for people who never saw an African person or a Muslim. They were like scared, just judging through what they see through media's eyes. But at the same time, we are here confined into this information bubble, but we see things only through Europe's perspective in a very Eurocentric way. How does Europe look like through outsiders' eyes? Because those are people who you represent in your books. So how do we Europeans look like, you know, from Africa, from Asia, from India, from wherever you like, even from Buenos Aires?
I think from all those places it looks mostly like a privilege place, a place where everybody is like rich and happy and plenty of things and stuff. Which obviously we know is not true, but this is the image that Europe tries to give, and from time to time, all the time, it has to pay for selling this image. I mean, Europe offers or sells this image because it wants to sell things, stuff, and ideas, and merchandises, and so. Well, it has a cost. I mean, the cost is many people would like to come here, because if you tell them the real life is here, and you show them this kind of life on the TV and everywhere, well, they would like to. They obviously will want to have a
life like this.
Yeah, to have a life like this, and then once they are here, of course, they find out that it's not like that. I mean, just 4 days ago in Madrid, a few days ago in Madrid, there was like kind of a revolt of mostly Senegalese people who are there. Maybe they have spent already, I don't know, 10 years, 15 years there, and they still have to sell counterfeit goods in the street. Like purses and stuff like that.
Knockoffs,
and they have to
basically.
run.
Knockoffs, basically.
Yeah, and they have to run every time the police come. And they have lived like that for 10 years, 15 years. And the other day, one of them died of a heart attack while he was running, and there was like a big revolt in the neighborhood in Lavapiés. I mean, the realization that it is not how they was supposed to be, and I think that's Europe in synthesis, like a big mirage, right? But it keeps on working as a mirage.
Were you surprised by this wave of immigration? There was like a peak of a crisis with Syrian refugees going through Turkey and Greece to Europe, with rafts and boats going through Mediterranean, all the camps filled to the brim, and it was everywhere. Whole world talked about that for a moment. Let's emphasize that. So were you surprised by that? Because I feel that thinkers of Timothy Garton-Ash and many others. They told us about that like 30 or 40 years ago.
Of course.
It would happen
Yeah.
eventually.
And it's been happening all along. I mean, the only big difference 3 years ago was the Syrian conflict that produced an important wave of migration. But the rest of it, the African migration, was not very different from what it was 2 years before or 2 years later. I mean, it's more or less the same. It's like a constant migration which responds to this kind of thing that we were saying just before. I was like particularly angry at that difference that many established between the Syrian migration and the African migration, because the Syrian people were like middle class, more or less educated, and they came because they had a reason, because they were threatened by a war and stuff, whilst the Africans were mostly non-educated, poor, and they came just because they wanted to earn their lives better. They had no political or external reasons. They just wanted to make a better living. And these Africans were like much more humiliated in relation with these Syrians that were like more convenient, suitable migrants. You know, it was like a big show of political incorrectness.
Yeah, if we listened like 30 or 40 years ago, we would have learned that this model of the world that we were building has to collapse at some point. That this great divide between the first world, the great West, very expensive, rich and happy West, and the rest of the world, especially the poorer South, will have to collapse at some time. And people would want to get from the South to the North. And that happened, or at least happened at one point, so we could see that with our own eyes. So I guess that today there are thinkers who talk about what will happen or what would happen in 30 or 40 years from now, and we don't listen. Now we don't listen. What don't we listen to? What would happen in 30, 40 years from now that we should prepare for?
You know, I'm writing a novel about things that will happen in 30, 40 years from now. That's my present, my current occupation. And even though it is a novel, it's like very difficult and risky to say, well, that is what is going to happen. Because if you see what was announced 40 years ago, or what was announced 80 years ago, 40 years ago, or stuff like that, you notice that they're mostly wrong. I mean, there are so many things that you cannot take into consideration because just they don't exist. I mean, you don't know that you have to take them into consideration. So any forecast is unbelievable by nature. That's why I chose to write a fiction with it, a novel with it, because I want to make clear that it's not to be believed. So I'm not surprised that any announcements or forecasts for the next 40 years are not listened to. And
so what's your assumption
moreover, because there is no project for this next 40 years or 50 years. I mean, from time to time, we live times in which we have not a project for the future. Sometimes we have. Usually we have. We had one until, I don't know, 1980. Socialism was going to change the world. It didn't work, and it's not in fashion anymore. It's not believable anymore. But now we don't have another one. It's in the making, I guess, because there is always through history has always been some, but there is some like these whole periods you know, I mean, empty periods in which there is not. And we are living one of those. So talking about future is talking about our incapacity to imagine how we would want the future to be. So, you know, just to complain and just to say, be careful, and just to say there is a threat, it's not very interesting. I mean, it's not very, I don't know, you know.
Okay, so maybe we should just add modern perspective.
Yeah,
more and more. So we have reporters like yourself sometimes, like in Hungary, you were a reporter. Here you don't call yourself a reporter, and I respect that in accordance to that book. But we have reporters going through the world trying to bring the stories back, tell important stories, open people's eyes, and so on. What's the point of having reporters in 21st century when you can see the world through tens of millions of smartphones, and you have access to direct source? You know, you don't need them to know.
Why do you think that an iPhone is a direct source? I mean, it's so indirect as a reporter's text, or as a reporter's report. It's just the difference is that you, for some reason, for some set of different reasons, believe that this reporter is better prepared to tell you what's happening in such and such place, or that you agree with the way he thinks things, or whatever. But it's not more direct. I mean, everything is, how do you say, conveyed by someone. There's no direct or neutral way of telling something. The point is that what do you think about the subject that adds his subjectivity to this?
What I mean is Arab Spring, for example, was reported by millions of people with smartphones, showing you live through their lenses what's happening, you know, on their block.
No, they were showing a scene in the street, and you couldn't make sense out of this scene if you didn't know a few things about what was life in Egypt 6 months before that. So that's what a good reporter is good for. I mean, to tell you, to put this into a context, to have different ways of seeing the thing, and to ask to different people. It's completely different to just the image of some iPhone recording what's happening in I don't know, 10 meters around a person, which is also very interesting. But it's not. It's neither more direct nor more complete at all.
Again, I agree completely. But at the same time, I see 20-year-olds who think that free coverage available on Facebook or Twitter or Periscope is equal to the effect of a work of team of reporters who spend half a year on the ground to try to say something. Is there any solution in that? Like,
you
where are
can
we
kill
going?
the 20-year-old.
That's
a good solution for almost everything.
That's true. Where are we going if we believe people who are willing to give us information for free, and we value this free information as equal to paid?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I think that the way we diffuse and consume information changes all the time, and it's, of course, now it's changing, and the system that worked all throughout the 20th century is not working anymore. And as much as the big newspapers and the big chains and stuff, they still keep some importance in this ecosystem, they are convincing us that their crisis is a crisis of journalism. It's not journalism which is a crisis. It's some way of gathering and diffusing journalism that worked, as I said, very well throughout some decades, and it's not working anymore just because there are a lot of technical changes. So we are looking for new ways, and I think it's very interesting. And these new ways include this 20-year-old broadcasting things with an iPhone. Of course, it includes it. And the point is to find, I don't know, like, how do you say, ensembles that
media outlets or whatever
that work all together. And anyway, you know that good journalism has never been very, massive. I don't know how do you say that in English. Massive.
Let's say popular.
I wouldn't. No, I don't like. I don't want to say popular. It's a matter of quantity, you know, not of appreciation. I like to give the same example. In Spain, there is a newspaper called El País, which is a bit like Gazeta Wyborcza here, and it has been very hegemonic in Spain in the 80s and 90s. It was really important as a place to see and say things in Spain at that time. And at that time, when it was like the main media outlet in the country, it was read by 400,000 people in a country that was about 40 million people. So it was 1% of the population that read this very hegemonical newspaper. So it's not massive or whatever the word is. You see what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
So the problem is that now many media are preoccupied to be consumed by everyone, and unfortunately that's not the way it works.
If we look at media in aspect of trust being put into them by readers or listeners or viewers, maybe, just maybe, that's a hypothesis, we're getting to times in which you don't put trust in outlets, in companies, but in individuals, like in a person that you trust, and you trust his or her opinions, point of view, and so on. Maybe we're getting to journalism phase focused on a person, a writer. Can that be?
Yeah, it can be. I'm not uncomfortable with the fact that many people don't trust the media anymore. I think it's good. It's good for the media and of course for the people, for the consumers of those media. I mean, I have always said, it's very long ago in Argentina, I used to say that they had to make a law that they called the 28th of December's law. I don't know if it works here in Poland. The 28th of December, every newspaper in the Spanish-speaking world publishes a fake news because it's the Innocents' Day. You know, it's like a joke.
Yeah, we have it on 1st of April.
Oh yeah,
April's Fools.
April's Fools. Okay, and I said that there should be this law that make it compulsory to publish every day a fake news. So it pushes the reader to read the newspaper the same way they read it on the 1st of April.
Consciously,
looking for the fake, you know. And it happened without the law. I mean, it has happened because of
fake news.
There was too many fake news, so the readers many readers, read their news or their media much more consciously than they did it before, when they had like kind of a blind faith in what they saw. And I think that's good for everyone.
Martín Caparrós, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.